Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Venture Stories by Village Global. I'm here today with two very special guests, Donald Stalter of Global Founders Capital and Ryan Darnell of Max Ventures. Ryan, Donald, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Erik. Nice to be here.
So we're here to talk about a few topics, one of which I wanted to discuss ISAs with you. You guys have been looking into the ISA space, evaluating investment opportunities. Don, I believe you've done one investment in the space. How have you guys approached where are the opportunities in the ISA space? What is most interesting to you right now? What types of businesses could emerge that you could see yourself getting interested in the future? Maybe Don, let's start with you. Why are you so excited about ISAs right now, and how are you approaching them from a venture capital perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the U.S., prices for university and college tuition have been increasing rapidly. Since I was in college back in 2004, I think it was my college education is probably sort of maybe $35,000 a year, and I know now that it's around sort of $70,000 a year at a private university in Chicago. And student debt has been just increasing super rapidly as a consequence. And universities and colleges are sort of incentivized to be that way. And so ISAs are really a boon to a lot of folks who want to go into the job market and who want to succeed. I think that today there are a whole bunch of different startup companies emerging kind of off the back of that and off the back of the creativity that the ISAs are affording people and sort of the security. And so we're digging deeply into the space. We actually have a play in Europe right now that's sort of akin to a Lambda school, but helping sort of leverage talent across kind of Eastern Europe, where sort of the pricing is sort of slightly different, and where the educational opportunities are also even more potentially technical than what you might see across the US. We're massive fans of the category right now.
And what other sort of use cases are you excited about? If we're back on the podcast in 3 to 5 years and we're talking about both of your ISA portfolios, what other companies or types of companies or use cases could you see being enabled by ISAs?
Well, I mean, obviously, sort of as I mentioned, a lot of coding businesses, they're businesses that, primarily right now, sort of coding businesses is what I've seen, but they're also sort of what people call micro schools. There's a business called Prenda. It was actually a YC business where sort of kindergarten through 8th grade schools in homes and informal spaces are financed effectively through sort of ISAs.
Totally. Ryan, how about you? How have you approached the space, and where are you excited, or could you see yourself investing?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things Don said, which are clear, like it does a better job in educational from inlining incentives, and obviously we have a big student debt problem. Two areas I think about that I think are the biggest, most obvious value add are one, lowering the barrier to increasing your earning power, right? And I think that's a big thing. I think that's what it's obviously there are tech people creating these earliest versions of the venture-backed ISAs. So our mind's going to in the early days go to, hey, well, how do you do that? You teach someone how to code, right? It's a very objective way to increase your earning power quickly is teaching someone how to code. But I think if you think further out, right, you think about kind of, the macro economy and what's happening now, right? For the last 50 years or so, we've had globalization. We're in the deployment phase of digitalization, and we're starting to move into the phase of automation, right? And, when that happens, I think everyone's pretty clear. I mean, Andrew Yang's created a whole platform on this where certain jobs are going to go away, and certain jobs are getting automated. And I think a few things. One, being able to, I think it can be very useful when it comes for people in mid-career having to go out and learn new ways to earn money, right? And I think if you can look at a certain demographic, and there's not people who going back to traditional school and going back and maybe getting like a graduate degree and taking on debt to do that and being out of the workforce for a long period of time probably doesn't make sense if you're 45, 47, you have a family, you need to earn money. But if you could create schools similar to Lambda that align incentives and they lower the barrier to being able to earn more money in a low time period, that's an extremely valuable proposition for the market, right? And that's one, it's going to be applied in other places outside of coding. Coding's most obvious, but like it's going to be applied in other professions as well. And I think if you're able to do that, that's extremely valuable. I think the other thing too is like unlocking talent and creativity, right? Because a lot of professions would that, I can go into a few examples that I think are interesting, but they require, almost like venture capital, a money losing business requires on the front end, they require a subsidy, right? And there's actually interesting use cases about whether it's being an artist, whether it's being like certain types of professional athletes that don't get paid very much in the front end, where there's actually non-formal agreements already happening, like friends and family, where there's money fronted and there's like an informal income sharing agreement, kind of pen and paper or a handshake deal. But there's also ways where I think ISAs can be more formalized and unlock different forms of creativity in the world as well.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of add to what Ryan is saying. I mean, I think ISAs sort of need to, first off, unlock, substantially higher incomes for a particular consumer. And then sort of secondarily, you need to sort of reduce the risk or the uncertainty of getting, a good job or a raise. I think that sort of taking those two theses and sort of thinking about the US economy or sort of society and the European sort of economy or society and sort of others, really, countries where there's full support for people from the government across kind of education, medical, kind of you name it. There's more of an opportunity to feel creative and to feel empowered, rather than in markets where we're call it strapped to pay bills and to worry about sort of everything from high priced education as mentioned to a whole slew of other things. And so, sort of one thing that I've discovered or sort of thinking about ISAs is that they give people one heck of a lot more freedom around, what they want to do with their lives, around, coming up with ideas and starting businesses. So I think that, and we've sort of seen this if you read the news, but a whole bunch of new sort of entrepreneurs are going to come out of the world of ISAs, but not just, pursuing ISA-oriented businesses, rather just feeling the freedom to go out and build new things.
Yeah, that's a good example. So just to kind of riff on that, like, I invest in Sweden quite a bit, right? And if you look at Sweden's startup ecosystem, on a per capita basis, they've created more billion-dollar companies in the past 10 years than anywhere else in the world but Silicon Valley. And you start to think about why that is. Like, there's not one certain thing you can point to. But one thing that the founders have there is they have, there's more social safety nets there, and they feel less risk. There's less risk to taking big swings and exercising your creativity, right? And so, to Don's point, like, ISAs could also have a very positive, like, indirect effect on the venture market, where if more smart people, when it comes to unlocking talent, if more smart people feel like there's less downside, like no one wants to live in the poorhouse, right? And if more people feel, smart people and talented people feel empowered to take big swings and go for it and think less about the downside, knowing that there's mechanisms like ISA educational institutions where the barrier to increasing your income, if you really need to and you're willing to put up the work, is they're present, right? And if that's present, then essentially your downside risk to taking bigger swings in life is less. And if ISAs can serve that function from a venture capitalist standpoint, it means there's going to be more smart, talented people taking big swings, and that's good for all of us.
Totally. And you guys identified earlier before the call, we were talking about some of the downsides or potential downsides of ISAs. Why don't you get into some concerns you have?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, there's an adverse selection issue. So people who have, higher earning potential are more incentivized to take out debt. Why would someone do sort of an ISA or income share agreement if they're confident, they'll make a high income and ultimately sort of overpay for it? So this sort of leaves people who are less likely to pay back the loans. And if they do, it'll be on a smaller level of income ultimately. And I think, we're not really seeing that quite yet, but that's sort of, a theoretical top-down issue that might come out of sort of the ISA framework. I think additionally, timing problems, with, debt, you start by paying mostly interest with a little principal repayment. Then by the last payments, you're paying a small amount of interest and principal. That means as, your career progresses and you earn more money, your debt obligations, will be reduced. With an ISA, this is reversed. So as you earn more, the amount you pay is also increased. So in theory, again, if the math doesn't quite work, this sort of disincentivizes the use of long-term ISAs, and the effective interest rate on an individual ends up, on a long-term ISA, which is worse than debt. So I think as we sort of look at businesses that leverage ISAs, we're trying to find opportunities with shorter term ISAs with sort of a higher rate. We want sort of consumers to reasonably estimate their income for 1 to 2 years instead of 10 plus years.
Yep.
And the cost of the consumer and profits of the business are more predictable, and businesses can scale much more aggressively sort of as a consequence of that.
Yeah, and essentially from the company's perspective, if you really think about it, you're underwriting talent and short-term earning potential, right? It's not dissimilar to a bank underwriting a loan, right? When a bank underwrites a loan, they're essentially saying, what's the potential that this person's not going to pay me back for my capital? With an ISA, it's essentially you're underwriting someone's talent and earning potential, and you're essentially underwriting it to what's the probability that they're not going to pay me back for the service provided in the form of education, right? And there's some ISAs aren't going to work, some concepts aren't going to work. I think it's good. There's a lot of companies going for different categories, and some businesses aren't going to work because they're not going to underwrite. They're not going to underwrite accurately. I mean, if you really think about it, someone who invests in fintech and marketplace lending will say, any idiot can go loan $10 million out really quickly. The question is, can you underwrite the loan correctly? And I think from the ISA's perspective, one, you're going to have to create value in the marketplace in the form of, one, being able to increase income potential, and also being able to produce viable candidates for a lot of these big companies who are going to hire them. But two, you're going to have to be really good at underwriting talent and earning potential in the same way a fintech company would want to underwrite risk and paying back a loan.
Totally. And you also mentioned other use cases that we can imagine, things that have high, upfront cost. So like, for Uber drivers to buy cars, or, for construction equipment instead of raising debt for it. What examples there?
I'll give you a perfect example. So I'm in my office. There's 3 paintings, and they're from a guy named Domingo Zapata. All right, Domingo Zapata. If you Google him, he's one of the kind of top most popular contemporary artists right now. And so, but if you're going to be an artist, right, and you're going to really go for it, you have to literally most likely not take any income for maybe 2 to 3 years before you really start to earn money, right? And back, around a decade ago, he had a corporate job and he wanted to pursue art full time, and he couldn't afford to take 2 to 3 years with no income. But he made a very small angel investment in a friend's company. The company did extremely well, and he ended up making around $300,000 on that angel investment, right? And that is very lucky, obviously. I think he was more trying to support his friend. But at the end of the day, once he had that windfall, he basically said to himself, all right, this is a chance for me to go all in on my artist career. Now he's one of them. It unlocked his talent, and unlocked his creativity. And it allowed him to do what he does best, which is be an artist. And a lot of people get a lot of joy from his art. He's made a lot of money he's making a lot of money as an artist right now. So that's like one just cool story that I like. I don't know how you productize that in an ISA, but it's an example of someone who had an unexpected windfall, that the barrier to pursue something that they wanted to pursue and kind of work their creative energy. It's just a cool example of if you could productize that in the different formats, how that could work.
That's awesome. I mean, that's sort of an example, I guess, about how people can become kind of more creative off the back of ISAs. If you go to, sort of the, more basic level, sort of the opportunity to, pay for a portion of a piece of construction equipment when revenues are realized, as opposed to raising debt at the start of a project, lawn care equipment, building materials. I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of different sort of very basic, items that can be purchased vis-a-vis ISAs, and can enable just, more productivity and sort of stimulation to the economy as a whole.
Yeah. Also, some people talk about ISAs in the realm of health. I'm curious. Maybe we can sort of segue transition into digital health. Ryan, that's a space that you've made a bunch of investments in or look at a lot. When you talk about your sort of investment thesis, digital health, where you're excited, where you're not excited, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's like 18-19% of our GDP in the U.S. It's a and it's rising faster than inflation. It's a huge part of spend for our country. It's been very, there's a lot of challenges in building in healthcare. But I think as an early stage venture capitalist, like we've started to see the one shift I've seen over the last 3 to 4 years is some of the smartest entrepreneurs are willing to want to start digital health companies, right? And that was not happening 5-6 years ago when I first started investing. So that's one encouraging trend. But look, we really, the two things we see right now in the early stages, I think we're kind of in the first inning of software really starting to affect in a positive way, affect the digital health ecosystem and improve it. Is we're seeing founders build better consumer experiences by using technology, right? And we're seeing founders start to either increase access and quality while lowering costs. If you think about it, like that's one of the things, like in the early days, I think of, or what we're going to see in the next 5 years. I think you're going to see a lot more solutions around founders being able to increase access and increase quality without increasing costs, or maybe even lower costs through software. And that's something that has not existed. It's kind of the healthcare triangle. If you look at it, anytime you increase anytime you increase access or quality, there's a linear increase in cost. And if you decrease cost, there's a linear decrease in access and quality. And I'm starting to see founders figure out ways to use technology to kind of reverse that cycle. And we're also seeing founders start to, for the first time, operationalize data in the right way. Data obviously in the healthcare system it's locked in. It's locked in these EHR systems like Epic. They've been fairly closed. We're starting to see over the last 2 years, we're starting to see large health systems want to make this data available to founders who are building companies, and that's a positive trend. And we're starting to see different ways for entrepreneurs to get access to the data they need, consumer data they need, and patient data they need to actually operationalize it. And I think we're just really in the first inning of seeing founders start to build companies that, either create better experiences or create better health outcomes in the form of operationalized data right now.
Totally. And how have you sort of seen that evolve over time? Like what was digital health, like 5 years ago relative to where it is today?
Yeah, one of the biggest changes I've seen is you're seeing very high quality, proven founders willing to build companies in the industry, right? And we're investors in a company called K Health here in New York, and Alon Block at K Health. He's a longtime CEO of Wix.com. He was the founder and CEO of Vroom, which is one of the largest used online car marketplaces, and just a world-class entrepreneur where I don't think, and he's just now getting the resources. He got access to consumer data, to make K Health's product function properly. He wouldn't have gotten access to that data 4 or 5 years ago. And you're just seeing people like him who are extremely talented entrepreneurs who can build massive companies that can eventually go public and be worth billions of dollars in market cap. You're seeing them go all in on some digital health concepts where 5 years ago, you just didn't see that. 5 years ago, you saw like lifetime healthcare person building healthcare companies. But I mean, I think like actually Nat and Zach at Flatiron were two of the first like really good generalist entrepreneurs to try to do something big in healthcare with Flatiron. And you're just seeing more of that, and that's encouraging because my opinion on digital health, like I think it's a hard sector to invest in because it looks like there's so much low-hanging fruit in the sector, but there is a lot of incentives that don't make sense. There's a lot of irrational incentives and how people are incentives to play on the back end. And I think, a lot of times when we invest in a digital health company, we'll talk to the founders before, and we'll really say, look, if you were to look at all the players in this ecosystem, how are you going to work with all of them, right? Like if you look at the payers, if you look at the patients, if you look at the providers, if you look at the employers who essentially subsidize health plans, walk us through like how you're going to build this company and work directly with all 4 of these players, and sometimes pharma is included, sometimes it's not. And, walk me through their incentives, how you're going to present your company, how you're going to deal with all these players, because you're probably going to have to deal with them. And some of them are going to be incentivized not to play along. And, I think we've had the most success in investing in founders who have a very deliberate strategy on how they're going to approach all four of those parties in the ecosystem. And, the ones that don't have a very deliberate strategy usually end up getting blindsided.
Totally. And you guys have also done a lot of digital commerce. I'm curious how you've approached that space in the last few years, and how that space has evolved.
Yeah. So, I think if you look at digital commerce over that's another area where the macro story, the macro trends have been in effect for the last 7-8 years. Digital commerce is now, I think it's above 10% of total retail purchases, and it's just going to continue for another 5 years, double-digit growth. So the market's just continuing to get bigger. It's enabled. Everyone knows this. It's enabled. Platforms like Facebook have enabled more company to directly with the user. And so the first iteration was just going direct to consumer, right? The ability to build a brand where you controlled a two-way relationship with the consumer, and you had a direct relationship with that consumer, right? That was the first kind of V1 of these direct to consumer brands. I think the challenge over the last 2 or 3 years has been the ability to take a playbook that worked in 2011, 12, 13, 14, and apply it in 2018, which is buying a lot of ads on performance marketing channels, and basically having a standard branding firm do all your creative, and then applying a pure performance marketing acquisition strategy post seed. And I think what you've seen is that it's just gotten more expensive. The toll on the highway has gone up, right? And it's just gotten more expensive to acquire users. And it has made it over the last 2 years, I'd say specifically for direct to consumer businesses, if you're relying heavily on performance marketing spend, the capital efficiency of those businesses has gone down, right? It's taken more money to acquire the same amount of users, and that makes it a less profitable business for us investing in the seed stage. What we've really focused on in new investments is the founding team's ability to build organic channels that are off the typical performance marketing channels, right? And it has to be very native and very specific to the business and the user. And the companies we're seeing and the founders we're seeing have success today have very deliberate plans around how they're going to build, how they're going to acquire users capital efficiently off the traditional performance channels. And they know their user well. And the approaches are not like, hey, this worked for some other company, it's going to work for us. It's very native to their company. And those are the type of companies that succeed right now. And you just can't rely, I'd say the biggest difference is you can't rely on just traditional performance marketing channels anymore.
Yeah, totally. Don, your firm has been looking a lot at vertical SaaS recently. Can you talk about why you're looking there and where you're excited?
Yeah, sort of along with the theme of sort of, ISAs, making life easier for folks. In parallel, we're, consistently seeing new software technologies that, make work easier, which, are revolutionizing industries that are sort of antiquated and bringing them into modernity, and creating just a lot more scalability across work and processes. We're investors in a whole variety of different software companies, but I think one of the most exciting categories that we're thinking about right now is the commercial rail industry, which Warren Buffett and a whole variety of other private equity investors have holdings in which is frankly reaping significant profitability today off the back of the transportation of commodities and other important items, yet is plagued with inefficiencies along the lines of navigation, along the lines of load balancing. How much can a car sort of carry on the rails, and a whole bunch of other sort of issues. We invested in a business called Cedar.ai a couple of years ago, which actually sort of went out to solve those problems. And I think that's a category that we're really, really excited about and where we're seeing some significant traction. We're also big fans of the farm to table movement. So, it's been a trend for quite a while now, but, is there an opportunity to sort of digitize portions of that movement? We invested in a business in Seattle called Barn to Door, which we're very excited about, which is kind of effectively a Shopify or an e-shop development platform for farms and sort of agriculturalists to purvey their products, to track inventory, to set up picking and packing lists, to enable payments, and to also enable delivery. So that's quite a leap in terms of what's going on in the category right now, where the farm to table movement has largely sort of lived through farmers markets or sort of exclusive merchants. We feel like there's an opening of kind of the demand side in the entire category off the back of more e-commerce work. And sort of thirdly, we're very excited about a business that does sort of AI data entry, creating more efficiency in highly manual, highly operational kind of category, where there's a lot of room for error, where KPIs aren't sort of regularly tracked. Hyperscience out of New York City has created a tool which effectively allows human readable data to be converted to machine readable data, and big insurance companies, mutual funds, banks, and others are all very, very excited about kind of the efficiency and the accuracy that Hyperscience purveys through its software.
Totally. And you guys are both focused on investing not just in the U.S. but internationally, and thinking about sort of business models. Obviously, Global Founders Capital, with the Some of Our Brothers and Rocket Internet. What have you seen right now in terms of business models that are replicated internationally, starting the U.S. versus business models that are starting internationally, replicated U.S.? What is sort of the intersection there, interplay of how we're seeing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, the interesting thing is I think there's cross-pollination globally in terms of models that you might see in one country and then in another. For example, and it's quite interesting too that some of these businesses can all come from the same source. Y Combinator, for example, incubated Lambda School, which we all love. They also incubated, and Lambda Schools are primarily U.S. focused. They also incubated or had in their batch a business called Microverse, which is sort of a Lambda School kind of for outside the U.S. And so I think the sort of interplay between seeing successful models sort of in the U.S. and then sort of seeing that same model kind of elsewhere is a positive in a lot of ways, because learnings can be shared, collaborations can be afforded, and ultimately, if a model is doing good for humanity, I think that's enabled across many geographies. I think the other sort of interesting thing to think about is that innovation, sort of call it the inception of a new idea or a new business, can happen absolutely anywhere, and I think that's very, very exciting. I think we've made investments in pretty much every country around the world, believe it or not, and we see seed deals in every country around the world. We see entrepreneurs going on and starting their very first business, and taking that bold step, at the age of kind of 15, in geographies all around the world. So there's a ton of excitement around entrepreneurship, and we're so happy to be integral to its journey.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's a true global market, right? I spend most of my time in New York and parts of Europe, specifically the Nordic region. And, if you think of a place like Sweden, it's a country of 10 million people, right? And there's been more billion-dollar VC-backed companies there in the past 10 years on a per capita basis than anywhere else but Silicon Valley. And if you talk to founders there, right, it feels like the market's more global earlier for them. Because they just, by necessity of their home market being smaller, they're forced to think global at an earlier stage, right? And you can't sit in a country of 10 million people and build a multi-billion-dollar business like you could in the U.S., right? So they're just programmed. I feel like European founders are more programmed to expand outside their home country earlier. And from a macro effect, you talk to a company like Voya, right? Like Voya's they're the bird lime of Europe. And, they were founded 18 months after launching, they were in 10 countries, right? Like, that's crazy. Like, that would never, it'd be hard to imagine Silicon Valley based firm being in 10 countries 18 months after being launching. So most people are raising their Series A. But I think one thing that I've like the last 2 years spending a lot of time in Europe and investing is the one thing that I've seen is if you think about the New York ecosystem, you think about some of the European hubs like London, Berlin, the Nordics, Paris, and like 10 years ago, these were all, they really didn't even exist. They barely existed as technology hubs, right? 5 years ago, they all seemed really small to Silicon Valley, right? I mean, New York was really just starting to take off. So were the other European hubs. And you look at them today, and they're all thriving. And there's more and more of the best technology companies are coming out of either New York, Silicon Valley is still the center, but more and more big technology companies are coming out of either New York or Europe. And what I see is their ecosystems are very connected. And if you talk to founders like, in the UK, if you talk to founders in the Nordics, talk to founders in Berlin, I think it's going to be more so in New York in the coming years, they want access to resources in other markets at a much earlier stage. And I think if you look at the last 10 years in VC of non-Silicon Valley markets, it was very like hyper-local, right? If you formed a VC firm in New York in 2011 or something, you were saying, hey, we're super connected in New York. We can help you. We're a New York firm. We're connected in New York, right? Or any non-Silicon Valley city. But now that's table stakes. Everyone's connected in their home market. And in my opinion, over the next 5 years, the very best firms are going to figure out ways to connect founders to resources in other markets, because that's what the market's going to want. And I think if you don't figure out a way to do that, you could have troubles with VC firm.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are a lot of really exciting arbitrage opportunities, kind of needless to say, across different geographies. And I think again, the rise of the ISA is enhancing some of those arbitrage opportunities. Where people kind of anywhere in the world can become kind of developers, and remote work has become very common. And so I think there's a very, very exciting kind of emergence of less of sort of a disconnected global society, and more one of collaboration.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about with two things, Ryan, I'm curious for your take. One is you mentioned Sweden earlier. We'll repeat the stat about their unicorn rate, and then what's in the water there, or why are so many big companies coming from there? And then I'm curious to get both of your takes on long, short Silicon Valley relative to the rest of the world in the next decade to come.
Yeah, it's a good question. If you ask someone in a European country why like Sweden's punching above their weight, you think about the companies that have come out of Sweden the last decade. You've got Spotify, you've got Klarna, you've got Minecraft, you've got Cree, which is one of the fastest growing digital health companies right now in the world. You've got Skype. So there's been a lot of you've got iZettle, which sold to PayPal for $2.2 billion. You've got a lot of major companies that come out of there for such a small country. And I don't, there's not one thing you can point to. There is on a per capita basis, there's 2x more technical people in the region than other parts of Europe. So there's a high concentration of technical talent there. But I think there's more subjective things around it too. I'll point to two things. One, I think part of it I mentioned earlier, where people feel more, they feel like there's less risk in taking a big swing because it's a capitalist country with more safety nets, right? And they feel like there's less downside risk, where in the US, people are prevented sometimes from taking a big swing, whether it's like student debt overhang, whether it's high healthcare costs, whether it's like, child services, all these things are paid for in Sweden, right? So the freeing people up to like really unlock their creativity and pursue what they want to pursue and exercise in the right way, like that dynamic exists there. But there's something else that's a little bit more like nuanced that I thought was interesting, is if you think about the country, they actually are resource constrained in the form of, like, hey, you're just, if you're someone like Amazon, I don't even think Amazon Prime's there right now. Like if you're a company, it's going to be one of the last, if you're a global company, it's going to be one of the last markets you enter because it's so small. Right. And if you look at, let's take when music was digitized, right? Let's take when CDs and analog music went to digital. Well, in the US, it was like a no-brainer. Like, how does software create the most value for us in the US, right? We were not supply constrained when it came to analog music. We could drive to the store. We could pick up a CD anytime we wanted. And, Steve Jobs basically unbundling the album and allow us to buy one song for 99 cents felt magical, right? That was the value there. But like, think about Spotify. If you talk to people in Sweden who grew up there in the 90s, like in the analog music stage, a lot of times the top albums wouldn't be available there for like 3, 6, 9 months after they came out, right? So, one of my friends said, if you want to go buy like the latest Tupac CD when she was in high school, like you had to wait, and it was really frustrating. And so there's also like high levels of piracy in Sweden, right? Because of that, and before Spotify kind of aggregated that. And Daniel actually took a different approach. He grew up a musician. He was a music fan, big fan of music. And so they were more supply constrained in the analog world. And his thing from day one is, how do we make all the music available to the world at any time, right? And that was the subscription model that Spotify pursued, because if you're resource constrained, having the access it feels magical, right? It's not just unbundling. He's providing access where maybe you did or didn't have growing up in that country. Is a very native approach to Sweden, but is an approach that, in my opinion, won out. And they're going to be the largest, they're the best digital music product. So it's interesting, does he take that approach if he grew up in the US? Probably not. So it's an interesting like nuance of, if you are in a smaller home market, but you're highly technical and you're highly creative, do you take a more unique approach to the market, to a specific market?
Yeah, and sort of to add to what Ryan is describing, markets are also sort of they're also sort of test labs in a lot of cases for specific businesses. So Sweden with its small population, or sort of Australia, the population reacts in different ways to different types of technology, to different kind of models, to different opportunities. And then as a business looks to kind of expand outside of that particular market, it can leverage the learnings from sort of its home market.
Totally. And lastly, long, short Silicon Valley.
Long Silicon Valley, but long so many other great markets around the world. The technology economy is booming, and off the back again of ISAs, of sort of efficiencies built into people's lives today, and sort of that increasing efficiency. People, I think, have more of an impetus kind of day in, day out to become entrepreneurs. If we look sort of specifically at Silicon Valley, very, very long Silicon Valley on the software technology kind of product side. On the, call it, elbow grease operations side, longer markets like New York City, sort of London, Chicago, et cetera, simply because there's more of a diversity in the workforce in those markets. In Silicon Valley, as we know, most everyone's involved in technology in some capacity. So if you're building a business in Silicon Valley, you're going to try to base it kind of purely on tech. Whereas if you're building a business in New York City, you might be more comfortable having a team of salespeople or account management people who are sort of banging on phones and doing things that, quote unquote, might not seem as sort of scalable as something that can be done through AI or technology.
Yeah, I'm long both too. I mean, so I think Silicon Valley is going to continue to be kind of what it's been, which is there's going to be, there's going to be continued innovation coming out of Silicon Valley. It's the ultimate network effect when it comes to technology hubs. But at the same time, like if I were to buy Silicon Valley or the basket, I'd probably buy the basket, meaning every other tech hub outside of Silicon Valley, because I think there's going to be more and more as software continues to take over every part of our society, or be integrated in every part of society in some way. You're going to just see more and more companies come out of hubs like New York, London, Berlin, Nordics, China, obviously, parts of Southeast Asia. So if I were to, I guess the question is long, short Silicon Valley. The short is, would you buy Silicon Valley or would you buy everything else right now? I would buy the other main hubs outside of Silicon Valley because I think their upside is much greater over the next 5 to 10 years.
I think that's a great place to wrap. My guests today have been Don Stalter of Global Founders Capital and Ryan Darnell of Max Ventures. Ryan, Don, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thanks, Erik.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst.